Hello and welcome to week 10. This is our final week of real content-based instruction and the week where we will be looping back to chapter 3 to kind of zoom out and take a look at some broader topics. I'm going to try to keep this really short because I'm hoping to just keep this week a little bit lighter in general, and I really just want to highlight a few small areas where I want to make sure everyone gleans everything that they can from the text. I think this chapter is pretty self-explanatory. If you disagree, let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions, but there's just a couple things I want to highlight before I let the rest of the material speak for itself and let you get on with finishing this course. The first thing I just want to touch on is this idea of the different tiers of service we see in the human services field. We've got that micro level field, which is a lot of what we've been talking about this quarter, our macro field, which is up at the top, and then something called the meso field, which is in the middle. I'm just going to take a really quick minute to run through all three of those. The micro field, or the micro tier, I guess I'll say, is really a lot of what we've been talking about. It is that direct service with an individual. It's your counseling, it's direct case management with a single person. It's that one-on-one, very small in terms of population, not in terms of impact, but it's that smaller practice where you are really just one-on-one. The meso level, which I don't know how much they mention in the textbook, but I think is really where a lot of the work falls, is sort of the in-between space between the one-on-one and the next tier, which we'll talk about in a moment. The meso tier is really where you're interacting with a smaller system, but not just an individual. So maybe a family, maybe a class of students, maybe you are the program director within an agency. I'll use where I work as an example. We have an on-site food pantry, and the director of that program and the people managing that program are kind of working at that meso level where they're serving a wide population kind of within an institution under a bigger umbrella. A lot of work falls in this meso area. I think it's so rare that we're really just working with a single person, again, unless we're doing that very focused counseling work, things that are very explicitly one-on-one. But a lot of the work falls in this middle tier. And I don't think it's always completely explicit where that tier begins and ends. I think there is kind of some up and down and probably some borrowing from other tiers when you're in that middle tier, such as when you're in a larger system, but you're maybe working with an individual in addition to working with their family unit. You might see those lines blurring a little bit. The macro tier, I think, is maybe the easiest to understand. It's really just big picture stuff. A lot of times when I think about macro practice, I think about people who are even working at kind of the political level, kind of on more of a community advocacy basis. Maybe they're trying to push for policy. Maybe they're running a large organization, things like that. It's really the big picture stuff. You're not doing that direct practice one-on-one, but you're still impacting a system kind of from the top down. The next thing I wanted to touch on is this discussion of ethics, because I think this is a topic where we all have our own personal code of ethics, and that guides the decisions we make, the kind of work we want to go into. And so oftentimes our personal ethics align with our professional ethics, but that is not always the case. And I think that's where sometimes some challenges come in. If you are a person whose personal ethics differ from maybe some of the code of ethics in your profession, I'll use an example of someone who goes into a role where they are a mandated reporter, but maybe who doesn't like the way our child welfare system works and doesn't think that it's right to call in a report on a specific situation. However, they are bound by that mandate. That's where you see some of those challenges between your personal and professional ethics coming up. In situations like that, we really want to, kind of do the work so that we know where we're going to run into trouble, but then also once we're in it, kind of taking the time to seek out, I would say, two different things: supervision and consultation. Supervision is a word you'll hear a lot if you go into a counseling profession, and it's basically just this time where you're with the person above you who has likely more clinical experience than you do, and you're asking them to supervise you. Basically, you're asking them for their guidance, their insight, their reflections on the work that you're doing. You know, maybe they want you to walk through what you've already done, and you can talk about what the options are, what the options were before you made a decision. Really just kind of unpacking the situation with someone who's likely been doing this longer than you have. Consultation I would view as similar, but maybe a little bit different. Consultation is more something you're doing with peers, or with sort of built-in supports that might not be your boss. They might not be able to tell you what to do, but they might be able to present a different spin on things. Again, I'll use my workplace as an example. We have an entire bioethics team, which is basically medical ethics. And so at any point, providers can consult this team. And again, they're not made up of people's bosses, but they're made up of people who are kind of trained to think in a certain way and who have an outside perspective of the situation and can give recommendations based on that consultation. A few last little things that I would tie back into our professional ethics and our professional responsibilities are some of these areas where, like mandated reporting, we really don't have very much say over what decision we make. And I want to tie this into the ethics part of this because I think it's important to recognize that this can cause some ethical tension in ourselves if there are areas where we might not want to act a certain way, but we have to. I think it's worth calling that out and worth considering these things from the get-go. We've already talked about mandated reporting, of children and vulnerable adults. There are a couple other I want to cover. The first one is called duty to warn. You might also hear this referred to as Tarasoff. This is based on a lawsuit that was brought against, I believe, a psychiatrist after he failed to warn a client's romantic partner that she was in danger. Google that case as you will. I think it draws a really clear line from the case to how we got this ruling, but it is pretty upsetting. So just proceed with caution. But the basic gist of duty to warn is that if you are working with someone in a mental health setting or in a medical setting and they give you reason to believe that they are going to harm someone, it is your duty as a professional to inform both that person and the relevant authorities. Again, these are not optional. These are legal and moral and ethical mandates, and you can find yourself on the other end of a lawsuit, of charges, if you fail to act. The other one I want to bring up just quickly is public health reporting. This one doesn't come up, I think, quite as often unless you're working in a medical field, so nursing, medical assistant, things like that. But public health reporting is really for communicable diseases that the public could be harmed by information not being shared about those diseases with the relevant people. So a good example of this is the COVID-19 pandemic a few years ago, when new cases had to be reported by hospitals, doctors' offices to local public health boards so that they could not only track how many cases were coming in, but also try to help contain the fallout of those new cases. Hopefully that all makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to let me know if you've got questions. And I think that's all I want to add to this week's module, so I will let you get back to the rest of the material.